Welcome, everybody, to today's Mentor Time. I'm excited about this topic. I always love to talk about making sure that we understand that anything we write, especially around our own professional development, our documents such as our CV, resume, even though we don't print them as documents oftentimes, those are all and what I think of as a version of a data visualization activity, both content and format. So today we're going to go over CV, resume as Dataviz. Why is this really important? Then I'll talk about what that means about how do you display yourself and what are some of the things that we're seeing. And as always, we end with what should you do? So we'll get started with why is this important? I'm going to do a very big skimming of what seems to be affecting us more and more. And this screenshot came from a step-by-step guide to creating scannable content. Ron and I often talk about scannability as an important part of what you're trying to convey in writing. It was interesting because this is the first couple of paragraphs of the article, and what I put in yellow, reading screens takes about 10% longer than paper. I actually went and looked at what they were referring to, which was another news type article, an aggregating article summarizing what they know about scannability. I didn't find any citations there. They just said some studies, and I didn't bother trying to search for it. It's too generic a term. There is research that's indicated that scrolling adds into these factors about maybe taking longer to read. And there are citations with this. And when I send the recording link out, I'll send you all these citations if you're interested. So I want to introduce you to a few concepts that are the science behind informing what I'm calling text as data viz. And I'm seeing, luckily, more and more articles now that refer not just to websites, but text. A lot of what you'll see today refers to websites because that's where the screen work was first being done. Overall, the goal that we want is for people to keep reading, scrolling down, not stopping reading. And this goes back to something that a friend of mine, Dr. Echo Rivera, highlighted. She has a couple different blogs on the law of Prägnanz. This was Gestalt psychology done 100 years ago, I believe. And it shows that our brains, when we're confronted with information, the first thing our brains will do is choose the easiest manner to interpret it as we can. An example of this is, at least in the Western world, when we look for information, we start at the top left of screen of a document of whatever we are reading. And that's where we begin to look for information. The second concept, again, you may have heard of some of these, cognitive load, that comes from psychology of instructional design. It's the layout. In this case, this was an article written for data visualization, but the way that things are laid out can make it easy or difficult for someone reading it when they're reading something new. Let me just give you the spoiler alert. Everything we're writing, everything we're doing in our careers, we're trying to get people's attention, and we want to reduce their cognitive load. So think about hiring managers or HR screeners going through many different resumes. That's a huge cognitive load because they're reading something that's unfamiliar. They're looking for familiarity, but they're reading everybody's career paths. And the big thing that we'll talk about today is scannability and readability, because this is what you can do to deal with the law of Prägnanz, getting things simpler and more orderly, but also with the ability to reduce cognitive load. There's a website Scannability article on this reference that talks about navigational elements, the way that you lay things out. It includes words, sentences, images, or animations. When we write documents, we're not going to have pictures. We're not going to have animations, at least not right now. But we do have words or sentences. And what we've approached this as, and what you hear referred to a lot, is that someone will take 10 seconds to scan down the left side of your resume or your CV or a document or a website. There's a lot of ways that this happens. So I want to show you the two patterns of 3 or 4 eye tracking studies. And again, I have the link in there if you want to read about all the newer eye tracking studies. One of them is called a Z pattern of reading, where you read across the first line, then you skim the paragraph diagonally and read another section. And in this case, you can see this is specifically a website because it's combining text and images. It looks like something that was probably on a website. There is a longer article from the Nielsen group that takes this all apart and goes over this in detail, but I chose to use Chris Lisi. He's an evaluator, Dataviz expert. His blog post on it from several months ago, where he summarizes from Kate Moran eye tracking studies for the last 13 years. This is how we've been reading things. But you notice on this picture, this has both images and text, and you can see why people jump the way they jump. If I were to apply this to a resume or a CV, this might be how it would look. They might read the heading information quickly and then go through, if you have your bio para there, and then jump down to not even read the end of your bio para, but jump down to your first experience or your education and so on. The second one is called the F pattern. And these 3 images are taken from that same paper, the Nielsen report on this. The first one is a heavily dense, heavily worded blanket information of text where the eyes are stopping. And that's what's called an F pattern, but it also is very dense and they're not doing scanning. More and more, even in the last 2 years that I've been tracking the mainstream literature on this, mainstream literature sounds so official, the mainstream media is showing that we are actually scanning more and more, and that we've apparently been doing this for years, if not many years, even reading on paper. But there is a difference when we have scrolling available to us. We're not turning a page. The next pattern is what the website picture that I showed you with the Z pattern might look like. Here's some images at the top of this in the middle panel, and then going towards text, and the text is more broken up than the left-hand panel. So that to me looked like a larger F pattern, but still pretty much of an F pattern if you go back to the original. And the third one is a lot of paragraphs now. So a paragraph of 6 sentences might be broken up into 3 paragraphs of 2, or I saw several things written in the last couple of days of people writing 1-sentence paragraphs, which actually makes me want to scan less, but that's just me. And that's a big F, but they're still basically an F tracking pattern. And this is the pattern that everybody who cites how your documents are read online says, oh, a recruiter only takes 10 seconds, 7 seconds, 5.9 seconds. Everybody's got some statistic, but they're all quoting this eye tracking study with the F pattern. If I think about how this looks, and Ron and I talk about it in our course review meetings for the last couple of years, this is what we believe happens. When people open up your document, it's usually going to come up as half a page, because the way most people's displays are set will open up probably not the complete document. It would be too tiny to read on a laptop screen, for example. You would get half a screen open. They would see your heading information, your bio para, and then get down to your experience. I drew out what I think the F pattern is. In my experience and in the amount of review work that I now do for the course, I see that with myself, my first scan is an F pattern. You can scan the left-hand margin and get the first third of the paragraph without even reading beyond the paragraph. And we'll talk about that soon, about things that anchor you or pull your eyes over to read a little bit more. So I wanted to show you a before. A friend of mine a couple of years ago sent me her CV. She said, Sue, I'm applying for jobs. She's very senior. She had a long CV, of course. And I said to her, I don't have time to do anything right now, but I'm going to take your first page and give you some formatting changes so that when you do a resume, you at least have some guidance that'll help you. And all I did with those formatting changes was move her walls of text, as you see at the bottom of the right page, into something many of you, because you've worked with me on this, know that I recommend. Under each experience, you have a couple bullets that are major task areas you work in. And under each bullet, you put in the results. And so you can see on the left-hand side, I just put a box around the area that I made into bullets. The information actually was all there. There was very little I changed. But now you can see, as you go down the bullets, you can see verbs that provide a result. I often talk about verbs that lead to a result: deliver, created, facilitated, things like that, where you can't easily see them in the wall of text. Why are we doing all of this? Because we have to learn how to better write for and convey information to the other side of the conversation. Similarly, when I present to all of you what I'm thinking and what I have found and what I think is an interesting topic, I'm trying to give it to you in ways that are absorbable by you all. That's what we want for our professional development self. There's a step-by-step guide that I referred to earlier, had these several areas where it said, here's how you can improve scannability. Write short paras, keep your sentences short, follow the 4-syllable rule. It says no word more than 4 syllables. I think 4 is too many, but I'll show you. Use subheaders, use bullet points, sprinkle in images. Remember, this is for a website. Add links to external resources and create lists. So, if you've been with me on other mentor times, I'll reorganize lists or add to them. Yes, brief writing. We've talked about that for quite a while. Sometimes I say even a 3-syllable word might be too much, because you'll see something later on readability. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but we're aiming to be at 5th to 9th grade level. Not necessarily for those of us that work in public health or in research, where we may be writing for more advanced audiences, but it's good to keep in mind generally, because when I do readability checks, it helps me better target my writing. Subheadings, yes, and left justify, we've talked about that a lot. Bullet points, yes, but remember the guidance is use a few, because after a while, bullet points become a long list that's very hard to absorb. No images and links only where we need them. For example, under products, maybe an online source of a conference we went to where our abstract is shown. And then the lists, yes, they're great for the things like how we keep track of our writing, our presenting, awards and honors, things where you need to list them. You don't have a lot of detail you need to put in. We really need to think about formatting as part of the data visualization. So just like we think about how best to make a chart or a graph, what kinds of colors, where we want to give space, what kinds of titles, we also think about what's the default size, how and in what way do we want to show legends in a chart. Same thing when we put our text down. We don't want to crowd the margins. I get some people that give me 1/4-inch margins and more, less. Things like hard lines that stop the reader's eye, or parentheses, I'm seeing that occasionally. And you can do a lot with single spacing rather than using a lot of the word defaults if you use word for word pressing. So I want to show you some of these before and afters, just to give you the visual image, because all of today is about making sure you understand how much the written text shows how, in what way you display yourself visually. Here's margins too narrow. You'll see the gray lines that show the actual document that I received from people. And as always, these people have said, yes, you can go ahead and show my CV or BioPair or whatever. And it was very tight. And this is on letter paper, and it came from someone in the A4 European world. So I can only imagine how it was reformatted on A4. But all she did was take some efforts at putting a 1-inch margin on the left. You can go 0.7, 0.6 even on the right. and spacing that, and also spacing, she had pretty good spacing between her biopara, which is still long, but to experience. And then you see under experience, you can see the bolding and then the italics. For the bolding is either, in her case, she had several jobs at UNDP or a couple. For other people, it would be bolding the role that you've done and then italics for the organization. Formatting can make a visual difference. And then when you think about it, as we'll see in a few minutes, you can then get a sense. This is the first 2 pages of her 3-page resume. You can see that you get a visual representation. You get the sections you're looking for. You can easily pick out the jobs she's done. So all of these are visual cues to you about what this person wants to convey to you. Have had a few people in the course submit things, making fancy resumes, and fancy in this case meant putting one of the big boxes around. And you can see how cramped it is on a 1-page CV. It's really hard to get yourself, like, why is it constrained in that box? Or maybe it's just me, but I read it and I think it's not that comfortable to read it. Hard lines, there's a lot of people who use a full line across as a separator. And in this case, the person actually used an arrow. And it stops the eye. It doesn't make it seamlessly scannable because our eye says, oh my goodness, oh, there's a hard stop there. And so you're not just reading on the left-hand margin. It's great that she has her headings there. You're reading education certifications, but then it comes to a stop and you don't physically have a reflex of stopping, but your mind stops for a sec before you can go on and scan some more. So they're not a good separator. I recommend, if you really want to use underline, you just underline the word. You pull the word over or the heading over to the margin, and that will signal to people, oh, a new section starting, especially if you use all caps. We have a lot of problem with word defaults. The word processing program does make it so that you have automatic, in the normal template set up for you, it's got automatic spacing, which changes to 10 points before and 6 points after or whatever. That's fine, except that when you come to spacing things, people think that there's enough space. And so what happened for me reviewing things is I see them where there's not enough separation in their headings. And so it's hard for people to pick out what the sections are. And the first thing people are going to look at when they're looking at a CV, a resume, a cover letter, they're going to look at, is it formatted the way I expect to see blocks of text on that document, on the screen, on the page? For me, I prefer that everybody use single spacing. In this case, this was really cramped. Rupak did a good job. He put his bullets on the margin and then it's indented that he wrote experience, but he's also got parentheses around what he actually did there. Parentheses is another thing that actually stops our eye, because most of the time in grammar in English, when we're growing up, we learn that parentheses includes additional information, may not be important information. So we're signaling to the reader, oh, this isn't important, when it really is. So I recommended to him on the right-hand side that he put a space between each, take out the parentheses, which actually saved us a little bit of space just because of the way the formatting was in what he sent. And then we ended up with something that was 1 line longer than what he had, but much easier to skim and to read. This is a focus on initial capitals, and it's a big difference between the US or the North American and the European world and parts of Africa and Asia and Latin America, where I find it. In many countries, people not only have initial capitals for their title, but they capitalize every content area they've worked in. So in this case, I showed you the one that this person worked in: general admin, program and project management, customer experience. You can see 5 lines of things with initial capitals. And after a while, your mind just can't absorb that many things, because your mind's saying there's a capital, but it's the middle of a line. It's not the beginning of a sentence. If we change it just to take out everything there except for his title, which he said in his country he wanted to leave it as Chartered Personnel Manager. Then we see we can pick up those phrases a little easier. Our mind is not working so hard trying to figure out all the capitals, even separated by commas. Let's go on then to parts of what your CV and resume include. The bio para, I'm always emphasizing to all of you that it should be one paragraph. And that's because your brain is looking at one paragraph. And if it's separated into 3 or 4, she's got 3 sections in her bio para, our brain is saying, oh my gosh, this is so long. Will not help hiring managers want to get any farther than that. When there's indents like this is considered old-fashioned because we've been writing with everything on the margin for quite a while now. We have to go inside where the indent is, like experience and management of subawards. And then we've got to go back to the margin to skim again, because that's what our brain wants us to do. And we're just giving the brain subliminal messages that this is too long and too difficult to read. So if all I did is pull it back into one paragraph, it's not any shorter. And this is not about content and whether I agree with what she wrote, but just to show you that when you apply the F overlay, like I did earlier, even if you only skim and your eyes get to 1/3 to 1/2 of the left-hand side of it, that you can pick up a fair amount of skilled leader, management, subawards, budget development. But you'll also notice where I've circled things, we have anchors that pull our eyes over. Numbers pull acronyms, CHW, for example. But if we had too many capital letters in there, that would again be difficult for our brains. We'd have to take more time to read it. On your full CV in the experience section, many of you have heard me say, too many bullets. You want to aim for 2 to 3 bullets. So when this person worked with me on her CV, it was important information, but it wasn't all at the same level. So we worked together on her 2 to 3 task areas of combining those 7 bullets. And most of them were then able to be under the last bullet as sub-bullets, which are a lot of achievements of fundraising and of work that she did while she was in Peace Corps in Zambia. Education, when people put education on the front page, it's usually because they haven't learned to do it differently, or because they're just finishing a degree or recently finished it. And so they want people to see that they actually have an MPH or have finished a bachelor's degree. But we do get people using that education space for everything they've done, coursework, as you see here, languages, awards. And so what happens is the brain's saying, okay, education, but I don't need all that information right now. I recommend almost always for people to put their education much later after their experience. It doesn't need to go up top and take space. And you can see what Chelsea did here at the top right. Her education is now 2 lines each, so a total of 5 or 6 lines. And then the information she had, she actually expanded her leadership and civic engagement and wrote a very nice section on things she'd done on leadership and civic engagement that didn't need to be defined by the period of time she was in academia. So this is Chelsea's overall 3-page resume that she was working on to apply for jobs a couple of years ago. And you can see, if you look at it at this big distance, you can see it begins to look like an infographic. Sections are readily visible, consistent format, good spacing, looks like it would be easy to scan. You certainly can find the sections that you want if you're looking through that. So now what should you do? I've given you a lot of the before and afters as things you can look at. And here's what I'd like you to consider doing. Take your 2-page or 3-page resume or short CV, or even your long CV, and print it 2 per page. And if you've worked with me, almost everyone I've worked with, I've said to them, here's what your 2-page CV, the first 2 pages looks like. And check yourself for margins, check yourself for consistency, check yourself for formatting, bolding, italics, but also check yourself for section heads and subheads. Check your lists like you see here on the right-hand side, publications. Nathan has used the hanging indent. Conference presentations, he could use it there to more effectiveness, because when we see that hanging indent, the first thing we see is your name or an author on that line. We can easily aggregate it and look quickly and say, oh, he has 5 publications and reports. And then start working forward. And maybe you'll come to the 2-hour co-working session to update your CV resume on December 12th. You'll be getting a message about that. But I do want to remind you all, I just mentioned hanging indents. This is one of the most underused features that can help you in using for your writing generally, not just for your CV or resume or applications for fellowships. It can help you when you're making lists for people, for writing, when you're trying to write citations. I know that many of you write bibliographies, you use reference managers, different things to organize them. But when you think about writing and tracking your own information, how many presentations have you done? How many of X and Y have you written? All the things Sue wants you to keep track of. This is where hanging indents will help you. And as a reminder, it's under the paragraph section in Word if you use Word for word processing. And then what you do is set a hanging indent. I set it at 0.25 so you don't lose a lot of space. The default is 0.5 that Word has there. Not a lot of references, but we've had 2 other mentor times on aspects of these topics. And one of them, the one in April, went in detail on other parts of what your CV includes and how you can change it. And the June, showing your experience and showing your skills, similarly takes a Dataviz approach to where and how you show your skills. So a quick review of why it's important to think about everything you write, and especially writing for your professional self, is a Dataviz exercise, and it's both content and format. All right, as I close the meeting, we have one more meeting on December 4th, and that will be the quarterly review of what's happening in the world of work. And again, things are changing. There's a lot to go over there. So hope to see some or all of you at that time. And then I put out the schedule all the way into January. I'll be putting it out for February soon, not necessarily with topics at this point, but just so you can do some planning. And those of you with recurring appointments will find that your appointments have gotten updated where there's a topic available. Thanks very much, and I hope to see you all next week.